Hey all, pardon the sweat. It's a kind of a scorcher today. And to be honest, I'm kind of getting over a cold. And I'm fighting the horseflies. I don't know why I thought today would be the best day for a video, but I was feeling a little bit inspired. The topic I wanted to talk about was nostalgia. Now, nostalgia is kind of an interesting topic to begin with. And it's one that I've always had like an odd soft spot for this idea, you know, the longing for the past and how things were and all that, and that sort of melancholic and sort of celebratory view on the past. And I don't know, I'm obviously no literary scholar or anything like that, so I mean, I may be bastardizing this concept as I describe it, but in the end, I think when I approach TTRPGs and gaming, I think about nostalgia in two fronts. There's nostalgia. I'm actually pretty sure I just walked through an entire spider web full of baby spiders. Dude, this is what I get for recording in the wild. But nostalgia as it pertains to the game, and nostalgia as it pertains to gaming. Which I know sounds a bit semantic, but it totally is. So building on that, when I say nostalgia for the game, I mean nostalgia looking at the system, the artwork, the vibes, you know, almost like the time it came out into, like the atmosphere with which it exists, you know. And I also look at the nostalgia for gaming, which is sort of like who we played with, where we played, how we played it, you know. So I just kind of want to do a little run through on both of those topics and talk about, I guess, some feelings and thoughts on it. And hopefully some of you out there will, will agree with me on it, have your own thoughts and considerations on it, and maybe we can talk about it a bit in the comments. So I think the first one I would like to talk about is nostalgia as it pertains to gaming, because I think this is the one that most of us can relate to most of all, you know. Now, for me personally, when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I was a good Catholic boy, and when I had gone through my first communion, for those of you who don't know, you know, being entered into the church, I was given a gift by some relatives. I was given some money, and, you know, I stowed it away, $100, you know, which to a kid who's like 10 years old, I mean, that's a lot of money, right? We had gotten dial-up internet in my house, and I had learned that you could go and play flash games online. You know, you had the phone line tied up so everybody would be yelling at you, and you'd have to play the times of day when you knew people weren't going to be bothering with a line. So I would fart around on like the Lego website, and I'd go to like Hasbro's website, and I'd play around with some of the other games that they had. Just because, you know, as a kid, it's like I thought about video games, you know. So that's when I found the tutorial video game. It's this old flash game for Dungeons & Dragons, and for the 3rd edition. Now, mind you, I'm maybe betraying my good looks here, but I am 31 years old. So back then, I was playing at the heyday of 3.5, you know. I remember playing that game. I was enchanted by it. I was over the moon about it, you know. I remember just the idea that there was weird dice and narration, you know. It just played like nothing else I'd ever seen. I played that tutorial maybe 200 times as a kid. I don't know why. I always assumed maybe there's a way I could make a choice and unlock like some secret options or something for myself, but unfortunately not. I don't think they ever considered making a full-fledged game out of that, but I look back nowadays and I realize I don't think I'll ever be able to play that game. I mean, I don't think I'll actually even be able to find pictures. If I can find pictures, I'll put them up on the screen right here. But it got growing in me, this desire to play the game, and I went out and I bought the 3.5 starter box, which I still have mine, so I'll put a picture of that up here. And at that young age, about 10 years old, I taught my cousin and my sister how to play. Did we play the rules? No, nobody does. At that age, nobody plays by the rules. We just want to throw dice and hope for a good number, right? I remember I wrote an adventure where I was able to use my Minotaur minifigure that came with the box, which I still have that too. Might put a picture up of that guy. And I called it the Motley Cave. The party stayed at an inn, ran into bandits. They went into a cave, the Motley Cave. They had to do the thing that everybody does where all of a sudden it becomes an arena, and they fought the Minotaur. Again, we didn't follow the rules, so 2 level 1s most certainly would not have survived a Minotaur, but they did. And the fact that I can still remember that game from when I was 10 years old, it kind of says something, right? Now, again, on this topic of nostalgia, would I want to play that exact game again? No, not really. And in the heyday of me playing, when I was like 13 through 18, would I want to play those games again? I mean, I'm in a weird position. I still play with a lot of those people I played with then, now at 31, and the games sort of helped keep those friendships together in an odd way. It always gives us something to do, you know, some reason to get together. If it's not the games themselves that we really loved, what was it that we liked? Now, I mean, I know a lot of people already have illustrated this point better than I have, but I think too often we forget that what we really enjoyed about it was the freedom, you know? Not the freedom of a fantasy game where you can do whatever you want to do. No, at the time, that was definitely a surefire way to pull us in. But I mean more so the fact that, you know, we're like 16 years old. A lot of us were just getting our driver's permits and our licenses at the time. We're starting to feel a little bit more like adults. Our parents were letting us drive to our friends' houses to play for 10-hour games. And we were young. We didn't have bills. You know, we didn't have real things to care about. Just like tests, you know, what we planned on doing for college. Who we were dating, you know. And nowadays, you look at it, it's like the hardest battle to fight is getting everybody together for a game. Which is reasonable, you know, it's not like it's wrong to have a family and responsibilities. But I think a lot of what we miss from gaming as kids was the freedom that came with being a kid and playing a game like this, you know? Naturally, there's a lot of parallels you can derive between this and video games. Where, as a kid, you could just stay up all night playing video games, you know? Until your mom would come downstairs or whatever and turn the light on in your room. You'd have to pretend to be asleep. Hide your Game Boy under the sheets or whatever. But I don't think it's wrong to want to capture that feeling, you know? And I think within every great game is that desire, that love letter to those games when we were kids, you know? I think we all want to capture that feeling again in some capacity. And I don't think it's necessarily a fool's errand to do that, you know? I don't think that it's wrong to try to capture that feeling. I don't think anybody should try to, you know, go lose themselves in that venture. I think about when I was in college, we had just graduated, and me and my college friends had gotten together. We rented an Airbnb back out by where we went to college together so we could play more of a campaign that we never finished. And was it fun? Of course it was. We got to recount the good times. We were cracking up, you know, drinking, having a good time. And yet, there were growing pains, you know? People changed. People were tired. We knew we only had a couple of days of reprieve from the real life that we had outside of our games. So in a weird way, there's this sense that whenever you enter that nostalgic realm of gaming, there's always that understanding that we're sort of playing pretend that we have all the time in the world. We're playing pretend that we can go on these adventures without responsibilities, you know? Now, the other form of nostalgia that I was talking about is a bit different conceptually, because this is nostalgia for the game itself. Now, for me, as you guys know, I make music, I make the podcast that I do, and obviously this show. And so it's not lost on anybody that I have a certain flavor of fantasy that I like to keep up with, you know? I make the dungeon synth music that I do. There's this certain vibe that I try to capture. And what's interesting is that vibe doesn't really belong to me, you know? Like I said before, my gaming habit started back in the early 2000s. Certainly not the era of old school or BX, any of these things where, like 1970s style gaming, early 80s style gaming. And a lot of times, I think people try to capture that vibe. You look at things like Stranger Things and look at how they wrote their stuff, and it's like, yeah, but is that game? Is it really the case? If you use graph paper and you make things into black and white sketch art, or even if you use that kind of artwork that's like the side of a van, that artwork with the oil paint, like the second edition stuff and all the Dragonlance novels artwork, like, is that then a true reflection of the game that was? And that's where it gets interesting, because it's like, is the goal to just keep making stuff for the old school stuff? Or, man, I'm so sweaty right now. I'm so sorry, everybody watching. But is the goal to, like, just make those old things again? Are we all out here with the goal of writing, for the second edition or first edition of the game? Or are we all longing for an idyllic version of the game where things weren't complicated with different settings and systems and all that, This kind of makes me think about, like, again, as a person who, sorry, horsefly, anybody who knows my stuff, it's like, with the BX gaming, like, it plays differently than the new school of things, especially with systems like 4th edition and 5th edition. It just plays different, In a way, this makes me think about sort of the meta of the rules, How much the rules impact how gameplay works. Because at its core, I mean, I do feel like Dungeons & Dragons have always functioned in the same general spirit, But when you start considering things like, action surges and like luck die and inspiration points and stuff, it's like these kinds of meta currency, which I know there's plenty of instances where luck die have existed in the past, but it does make me feel like sometimes, like, the games do have some subtle differences that make them very unique in how they play. But I feel like at the end of the day, most of us played the game the same way no matter what. We just had different names for things, different titles for things. Things sometimes required more or less dice rolls. Sometimes we didn't have a spell for it, or sometimes we had too many spells for it. But in the end, I think all of it really functions the same way through the lens of nostalgia, We're making choices, we're facing consequences, there were jokes, there were hard times, easy times, one-liners we all hold on to still to this day, But it makes you wonder about something like edition wars. This is going to sound really tangential for a second, if you can imagine that. But I work with kids, little kids, that is, and we're always working on teaching children how to share, how to advocate for themselves, to use their words. And it's funny how much, when you look at adults and how much they can't disagree without getting angry, you know what I mean? I always wondered why that is. Because if at the end of the day, gameplay for D&D really is nothing all that different across people, then why is it that we care so much about which rules that we're playing? I mean, maybe some of us just care that much about the meta and about the rule systems, which is valid. I think we all have our favorite system, And I think we all have the system we think is our favorite, but when we really get down to it, we're like, do I really want to deal with the grapple rules again for 3.5, So it makes you wonder, why do we come to the table so hyped up and ready to argue when it comes to discussing our favorite editions online? Obviously, there's the anonymity that comes with talking online with strangers and the desire to be right. But it makes you think, and in my personal opinion, that a lot of it's looped up in that nostalgia we've been talking about, or I've been talking about. You've been listening. But feel free to comment if you'd like to discuss. I don't know, can you tell I'm still new to this YouTube thing? I think a lot of YouTubers wouldn't be caught dead walking around out here in the sun, baking in like high 90-degree temperatures, sweating for the camera. But I do it for you guys. I do it for you listeners out there, viewers, whatever. Anyway, in my personal opinion, I think a lot of what brings people to these arguments is nostalgia. You know, it's the editions we grew up with. It's the ones that we have the most, like, and don't get me wrong, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. But, like, I think about, like, my friends, they will fight tooth and nail to tell you that 3.5 is the best edition of the game, right? And then you ask them how you calculate your saving throws, and more than half of them have no idea. You ask any of them how to calculate how many skill ranks they get at level 1, no clue. But they'll tell you up and down that that's their favorite edition. And you ask them why, and they say things like, there were just so many choices, you know? Things were just more, you know, I just had more fun. And it's like, well, then I guess maybe what you're trying to tell me is you had the most fun playing the game when you played that edition. And honestly, I'm about to start a 3.5 campaign with a bunch of my old friends who I played 3.5 with back in the day. And it's going to be very interesting to see what their opinions are by the end of it. I introduced all of them to old school, and now that we're wrapping up a few-year campaign, one of the players just max leveled their halfling the other day, which was pretty remarkable. Obviously, he had some opinions on it when he found out there's no capstone abilities to being an 8th level halfling, which, sorry. But it does make you wonder how much the rose-colored glasses are going to be removed and what people will really think, you know? Will it still be their favorite? Or are we going to start to peel it back and realize, oh, well, you know, I'll never have the games that I had back when I was a kid, you know? So, I guess to wrap this whole thing up, nostalgia is really a weird concept when you think about it. This yearning for things that have passed or the way things were, this longing, this sense of enjoyment of it, you know, the good times. And when you think about it through our hobby that we play, it's interesting to think of it as sort of like the rose-colored glasses that make us look back on those memories fondly and even shift our opinion on how things went because of what we were doing at the time, you know? How things were, the simplicity of life. And it's interesting to think about chasing after those nostalgic feelings and trying to do, you know, things that evoke those feelings, bring back the sensations of the good times, listening to old music, looking at the old artwork, trying to emulate that in our writing. Now, do I think that it's not a good idea to do that? No. But in a sense, I think people will pull back the curtain and realize that what's behind that nostalgic desire is a thing that you'll never be able to truly get back. But I think that that's sort of the beauty of nostalgia. It's that longing for it that gives you the sense, that weight of how important those memories were to us as kids, as young adults, in those formative years. And so I guess when you feel that urge to go back to those days, just think about what it really was back then that meant the most to you, you know? If it's the case that these old games are a great jumping off point, a scaffolding for going back down memory lane, so be it, you know? But I'd say use this as an opportunity to be grateful for the great times that you did have, a chance to think back, reach out to friends you used to play with, maybe chuckle about it, bring up an old memory that you guys have together about a game. Just, you know, recount the good times. Consider your growth. Consider everything you've gained, things you've lost, and all the things that you have to be grateful for. And I think that in a sense, a game like Dungeons and Dragons being able to operate as a time capsule for so many people in that way is kind of magic, you know? Not to sound cheesy about it, but it's true. So, I guess on that note, I'm going to go jump in a pool, because I'm currently dying right now. But I hope that, you know, this topic was something you guys could maybe relate to, you know, something that made you think. And if it did, put a comment down below. I've really enjoyed having the freedom to make both shows, or the concept for shows on this channel, doing both these DM diary things, even though this is only the second one. I'm sure there will be more. And being able to do, you know, the main story stuff. I got a new video coming out for that too, so don't worry. It's not all mushy gushy. But until then, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for watching.